just takes her a while. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Wallace. We are the silver capital of the world. In 130 years, we've mined $7 billion worth of metal out of these mines. Wallace itself has been responsible for 2 million ounces of silver alone in 1 year. So we were discovered by a fellow by the name of Colonel William Wallace in 1884. He wasn't really a colonel, but when they settled Wallace about 6 years later, somebody forgot to clean their chimney and the entire business district burned to the ground. It was a law then that you had to rebuild in brick and mortar. What you're looking at straight ahead of us is the Northern Pacific Railroad station. It started out 200 feet that way to the north of where it now is. That would put it just on the other side of the freeway, with the tracks running right underneath the freeway. When I-90 was coming through, they were going to destroy it. So it was the first building to be registered as a national monument. When they tore up these tracks that go right underneath, right where we are now, it became a bicycle path called the Trail of the Coeur Lanes. It's a paved bicycle path for 72 miles. Ring the bell. So 24 miles up this particular street is the town of Murray. In 1882, H.A. Pritchard discovered gold up in Murray, and we had ourselves a little gold mine. Some recognizable names that partook of that was the Guggenheim family. The only problem was they took all their profits back to New York to help build the Empire State Building. Some other familiar names was Wyatt Earp. He and his 2 brothers and his wife turned up in a place called Eagle City with a great big circus tent. Well, Eagle City doesn't exist anymore, and they lasted about 9 months with their big circus tent saloon. They jumped a bunch of claims and disappeared one night about 9 months after they got here. Nobody knew what happened to them. It was referred to as the Big Burn or the Big Blow. The winds were 80 miles an hour, and trees were just exploding all over. Wallace was completely circled. The trains were full of women and children trying to get out of town. We're going to turn around here, go back to your tour of the mine. This is the 9 Mile Cemetery, and they have a monument to some of the people that lost their lives in the 1910 fire. Okay, ring the bell. One of our local heroes was a guy by the name of Ed Pulaski. Ed was a forest ranger, and he had a crew of about 45 guys. They were trapped up above Wallace, and it was burning all around them, and Ed knew that they were going to get taken out by the fire. So he herded all the men into a old abandoned mine shaft above Wallace. As the fire went over them, he had to hold the guys there at gunpoint. They were so scared they all panicked. That night, Ed saved all but 6 of the 45-man crew that he had. He's responsible for the Pulaski tool that's still being used in firefighting today. So we're going to go up a pretty narrow road here, and those of you on the left side, I would prefer you not look down. Okay, the guys up here that run this tour have been miners their whole lives, so they have lots of stories to tell you. Huh?
Now most of the prospectors came through the area were actually headed for Murray. They were headed for the gold. Some of them slowed down to look at these mountains. One of the things they look for is white quartz. Now quartz is not a guarantee, but it is a good indication that you might find minerals there. In this area, gold, silver, lead, zinc, copper, now they're all associated with white quartz. The guys who founded the mine, they found a vein of quartz out of the hill, so they started mining that. Back in the 1800s, those guys didn't have any power tools. This was all pick and a shovel, double jack, and a hand steel. In 7 years, they managed to get 70 feet into the rock with just the basic hand tools. It might not have been full-time work. You had narrow canyons like this, they could have got snowed out in the winter. They might have had to stop and get jobs so they could get groceries up here. But it did take 7 years for them to get 70 feet into the rock. Now we'll come over here to the lower portal, and that's actually where we're going to come out of the mine. I'll show you some of the tools they used to use, some of which are still used today. If anybody here has a camera with them, they'd like to get a picture in front of the portal, if you set that camera up, I'll be happy to take a picture for you. Anywhere inside the mine you'd like to take pictures, feel free to do so. And if you get questions, please ask, it helps. I've been going underground for over 27 years, so if I don't know the right answer, I'll fake it real well.
Awesome.
This is where we're going to come out of the mine. We'll go in up above, circle around the hill, and come out here.
Good job, Heather.
Right now, I'll take a couple minutes, I'll explain what we have on display, and give you some more history about this mine. When you go to work underground in a mine, some of the tools you know from the surface, they actually have different names for underground. Now, anytime they blast rock in a mine, whether that's good or a waste rock, when the rock hits the ground, they call that muck. So anytime you see a shovel in a mine, they call these a muck stick. What do you guys call these?
Sledgehammers?
Yeah, on the surface, that's what everybody calls it, a sledgehammer. Underground, these are called a double jack. You got that name back in the 1800s. Usually back then, you'd have 2 people working together. One guy'd have the double jack, his partner would have a hand steel. The guy with the hand steel, he'd hold the steel against the rock. His partner would swing the hammer and hit the steel. Each time they hit that steel, they turn it just a little bit and hit it again. This is how they drilled the holes to set their explosive charges. Now, back in the 1800s, there was actually a trick to doing this. See, those guys didn't have any electric light. They worked by candlelight. So to give his partner a brighter target to swing at, the guy with the hand steel had actually put his thumb over the end of the steel so it would show up brighter. When his partner started to swing the hammer, he'd move his thumb. There's a lot of trust and faith there. And they did take turns with the hammers. What would you guys call these?
An axe.
An axe? Yeah, that's what we call them. I was just checking. This right here is called a fin hoe. Developed in the later 1800s by a guy from Finland. They still use these in mines. And when they blast the ore down, sometimes the material can get underneath low overhangs or in cracks where equipment can't get to it. With a fin hole, you can dig into the cracks, or you can reach under the overhang and pull the material out so they can get it picked up and taken out of the mine. If it's good ore, mining company's going to want it all. They also used to sell a lot of these right downtown to hardware stores to the girlfriends and the wives. They'd use these for gardening tools. They make good gardening tools. Right there's a regular pick. The one at the very end is a track pit. When they were ready to lay rail in a mine, they used to use the pick in to dig trenches for their ties. They'd put ties in, stand the rail up. They could just flip that over, use a hammer in to drive spikes to keep the rail in place. After the 1800s, this mine stayed abandoned until 1960. It's when a larger mining company acquired this property. They brought up power equipment and they extended the original drift back another 400 feet. They didn't find much of anything. So thinking the ore would get better if they went deeper, they backed up a little bit and they sank a shaft 200 feet down. Then they mined that 800 feet out each side at the bottom. And they still didn't find nothing. Money got tight. They got discouraged, so they loaded up and left. When they abandoned the mine, they forfeited their mineral rights. The Day Mining Company, a mile and a half up the canyon, their shaft was down below the 2,000 foot level. At 2,000 foot deep, they started falling a little bit of silver down the canyon, so they bought the mineral rights for this property. When they come underneath there, they found the silver the other guys had been looking for. The older guys were actually in the right place, they just didn't go deep enough. Day Mines hit a huge pocket of high-grade silver, and they took millions of dollars worth of silver right underneath where we're standing. Now, over the years of mining, as you guys probably know, there have been a lot of changes. They're always trying to make things safer. One of the reasons for change happened on May 2nd, 1972, about 12 miles to the west of the Sunshine Mine. The Sunshine had a fire underground. 91 guys lost their lives in that fire. It's to date one of the largest non-coal related mining tragedies in U.S. history. One of the many things that's changed from that time is now we have mandatory brass boards. When you hire out with a mining company, you're issued 2 pieces of brass with a number on it. One goes on your belt, the other one goes for the board. And when you go to work, you go underground, you tag in. Come back to the surface, you tag out. The reason for that is, if there is an emergency, a reason to evacuate the mine, when they think they have everyone back on the surface, they can just look at the inboard. Brass on the board means they've got people underground. They'll check the brass for the number. That gives them your name. But once they know who you are, they'll know where in the mine you were working and where to send a rescue team to look for you. Mining companies do take this real serious. First time you forget to tag in or out, you could get a verbal warning, you might get a written warning. You forget to tag in or out a couple times and they will fire you. They take this real serious. Now before we go up there and get started, I got one more thing to tell you about the mine right here you might find interesting. This mine right here used to be a high school classroom. Little redneck, huh? In 1970, there was actually more than 30 working mines in this area. They had big ones and little ones. They had a problem getting enough experienced miners to come in and fill all the jobs. So the local mining companies got together with the Wallace and Mullen high school districts and came up with a mining class. They got a couple of retired miners to come up and teach. They brought up the equipment. If you were a senior in high school, you could elect to take this mining class. And there were some girls who took that class. And when you graduated, if you'd passed this class, you were guaranteed a job in one of the local mines. Wow. And that actually worked really well for everyone. Mining companies had a group of kids coming straight out of high school that not only knew the basics of what was going to be going on underground, they knew the basics on how to stay safe underground. School's got a class kids wanted to take, and the kids had a class that would guarantee them a good job straight out of high school. That worked really well till 1982. The price of silver had collapsed. In this area, all the mines were either laying off or shutting down. They didn't need the class anymore because a few companies still working could pick and choose from all the experienced laid off miners. But while this class was going, this was actually the only accredited high school mining class in the country. It was a great VOTEC program for this area. You guys want to know what the coolest part about this class was? They taught the kids how to use explosives in here. Try getting away with that in a high school nowadays. It was a different world back then.
Yeah.
This was a great class. It was full every year. The Galena mine at the west edge of town, their shaft goes down 6,000 feet. Lucky Friday mine, 6 miles to the east of Mullen. Just about 2.5 years ago, they finished a new shaft project. That goes down 9,600 feet. And the deeper you go, the hotter it gets. 9,600 feet underground, the rock temperature is right at 140 degrees. They've got huge chillers, air conditioners, constantly pumping cold air, but it's still miserably hot with a real high humidity. All right, guys, you ready to go play in the dark? Hey, you notice I'm the guy with the light? Power goes off, I won't run too fast.
No.
You can touch that, just there's a little calcium in that water, they call that flow stuff.
This is another one. It's not Disney.
When you go underground in a mine, the ceiling,
Oh, what?
the ceiling is called a back. The sidewalls are called ribs. And when you come to the end of a drift like this or your stope, that's called a face. Right here on the rib, you can see some water coming down, natural groundwater.
Yeah, so I'm not sure.
All the mines in this area make groundwater like this. In the deeper mines, between the natural groundwater and the water they use in the mining cycle, they have to pump water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week so they don't flood.
Wow.
Oh, God, honey, I love you.
Watch your head, Lauren.
Now this right here is an old core drill or an exploration drill. These are also called diamond drills. The reason they call this a diamond drill, if you look at the bit here, if you run thumb across those snubs and sparkles, they're all industrial grade diamonds. They use diamonds to cut the rock. This air motor will spin the rods at a real high RPM. While they're spinning, they're slowly fed into the rock. The diamonds in the bit will cut the rock in the round core you see up here in the floor box. Inside this last rod and bit, there's a metal tube. At the bit in that tube, there's one of these little one-way springs that have bridges in it. This lets the core slide up in the tube, but it won't let it slide back out. Now, with this drill, once that tube is full, you stop the drill, pull all the rods out of the hole, and you empty the tube into the core box. At the front of the box, you'd write down what level of the mine you're at, what your drill number is, what the hole number is, and then the footage. How far in the hole you are when you start that box. Each time they empty a tube, they add a wooden block number to show how much farther they've advanced the hole. This way, when a geologist gets that box on the surface, if they do see good ore in there, something they like, all they have to do is look at the front of the box and they know exactly where in the mine the drill was setting, at what angle, how far in the hole they were, and they know right where to go mine that rock. It's a lot cheaper to do it this way than it used to be to run a drift this size just hoping to find something. Now they know right where to go get it. This drill right here was good for 200 feet out into the rock. The new drills they're using underground today, those are electric hydraulic. Those drills are good for over 3,000 feet out. The technology is really advancing. And does everybody know why they took birds in mines?
What is new gas?
Yeah, early gas detectors. Most of the bad gases in a mine are heavier than ambient air. Gases settle low to the ground. So you put the bird on the ground by where you're working. The bird's singing, everything's good. The bird dies, you got bad air, it's time to get out of the mine. That bird right there wouldn't be much help. He's in pretty bad shape. Easy way to remember about the birds and mines. You got good air, you got bad air. And good air, you got bad air. All right. Now, this right here is another change from the mine fire in 1972. This is called a self-rescuer. Now when you go to work underground in an active mine, you're required to carry one of these with you at all times. You carry these in case you encounter smoke. If you're getting smoke, you'd pop this open and pull it out, bite on the mouthpiece, put on the nose clip and headband. These are only good for 1 hour in heavy smoke, so you can't use them to go look for anyone else. These are just to get you yourself either out of the mine or somewhere you could safely barricade yourself in with supplied air to wait for a rescue team. There's a chemical in the filters that'll change the bad gases and smoke into more breathable air. It's not actually good air, just more breathable. Problem with the chemical reaction is that also produces heat. If you're using this unit in really heavy smoke, these can get hot enough to burn and blister the inside of your mouth. But if it was that hot and you pulled it out, you'd probably only last for a few breaths before you were down on the ground. That's another reason you can't use them to go look for anyone else. That's a really good unit, and it's what they still use today. The backpack unit right here is called a dragger. This is what mine rescue teams use. Now, each mine will have at least 2 6-man rescue teams. These are guys that actively work in that mine, they know it real well, but they also go through extra training to learn how to fight fires underground or to rescue miners from different kinds of hazardous situations. These units are rated for 4 hours. That gives the guys on the rescue team time to get underground, start fighting fire, or to search for trapped miners. Any questions on these? I'm doing pretty good, or I'm boring you people to tears. All right, let's go on down this way. Now this is where we like to talk about ground support, different ways to hold the rock up. The chain link fencing you see up here, that's just what it is. They use that underground to keep the smaller stuff from falling down on you. They call it chicken wire. These metal strips are called mats. Using rock bolts and a jackleg drill, you can actually bend and form the mats to the rock to help support the ground. The squares of wood you see up here, they've all got holes in them for that bolt to go through. That gives that metal plate just a little wider bite to help support the ground. You know what they call them boards on the ground in mine? I was talking to you, right there. They call them holy boards because they got a hole in the middle for the rock bolts to go through. This is one type of rock bolt they use underground. These are anchor bolts or mechanicals. With this type of bolt, once you see where you need the ground supported, you drill a hole with a jackleg drill, put the plate and board on, you thread this shell on just a little bit, pop the band and push these up in the hole. To tighten them, they use a driver with a jackleg, and for this type of bolt, it looks like a long socket. Put the machine on the bolt, push it all the way up in the hole and turn it. As you turn it, this wedge will thread down on the bolt. That brings the wings up and out. The ridges on the wings bite into the rock, and that's what holds the ground up. These work really well. This right here is called a split set bolt. These are industrial spring steel. With this type of bolt, it's kind of similar. You drill the hole, put the plate and board on, but use a different type of driver with a jackleg and hammer these into the hole. As you hammer this into the hole, it'll compress. Once it's in the hole, it's trying to expand back out. The pressure and the friction hold the rock up. These are actually stronger than the mechanical bolts. This right here looks like an old piece of rebar. These are called Dewey dags. With this bolt, once a hole is drilled, you'd fill the hole with glue sticks. They're a 2-part epoxy. Put the machine on the bolt, push it up in the hole and turn it. As you push the bolt in the hole, that'll break open the glue sticks. While you're turning it, these ridges mix the glue. You only need to hold these up with the machine for about 45 seconds to a minute to let the glue start to set. Take the machine off, put on the board and plate. If you look, these bolts are actually threaded to take a nut. You tighten the nut to 120 foot-pounds of torque, and these are the strongest of the rock bolts. You guys gonna be able to see from back there? Now, outside we talked a little bit about the old days when they'd hand steel. One guy working by himself had a smaller hammer called a single jab. Take the steel, put it against the rock. All day long to drill holes. Those guys didn't have these electric lights. They worked by candlelight. Didn't have a big lighter either, but I got one.
Wow.
Now, that's not really a lot of light to work with.
No.
Hey, look, we got Marvin the Martian. How'd you like somebody to swing a hammer in your hand, that kind of light?
Wow.
Especially if you guys were out in town the night before. Now, I'm not sure about the candles from the 1800s. Those could have been the old tallow candles. They could have been beeswax. The one you see burning right here is kind of special. We get these imported straight out of Washington, D.C. You know how you can tell? They ain't too bright. Now, sometimes underground people do get clumsy.
Wow.
Right back where we come in, you can see some daylight. Deep underground in the mine, you'll never see that. It is so dark, people get disoriented, actually start to lose their balance. Now we use electric lights. I like these better. Every once in a while, we get people up here that like it better when we turn the lights back on. We're using carbide lamps. You'd open up the bottom of this and fill it with calcium carbide. Put it back together. You can fill up the water tank on the top. Adjust your water drip right here. When water drips down on calcium carbide, that produces an acetylene gas. The gas comes out of this hole, you light that up, adjust the flame, and these put out a lot more light than candles did. It's also the same kind of headlights they used on the first Model T cars. Some of the old cruise ships used to use calcium carbide for the ship lights.
It's a smaller version of how they used to use old cameras.
No, that wasn't calcium carbide for the flashlights.
I wish that would work, because you could light that.
You know, last year, my buddy Fred had his up here, and that actually did work.
Like, see that.
All right.
Motorcycle headlights for that.
We're gonna head down this way. It gets a little low down here towards the end. Cool.
No problem.
Yeah. Yeah. When I'm ready. I got a lot to talk about before we get there. Are you guys having fun in here? This is one of the old high school classrooms. Now here in the Silver Valley, basically we do two different styles of mining. We do drift mining, which is an open area like this. This is where they lay rail and bring in track equipment to move them up. Where nowadays in a lot of mines they're using diesel-powered rubber-tired equipment underground to move it. The other type of mining we do is called stope mining. These are all shaft mines, so when you go to work you're on the surface, you go with the hoist, you get on what's called a skip or a cage. That works like an elevator. It'll bring you straight underground to whatever level you're going to be working on. Get off the skip on your level, you get on an electric train called a motor and they drive you back to your work area. In stope mining, what you're actually doing is you start at that level of the mine and you mine your way up to the level in the mine above you. As you're mining your way up, you build a wooden raise that has a horseshoe on either side. Start today, you climb up the ladder to your stope no matter how far that is. And in this area, depending on what mine you're at, the distance in between levels will be either 200 or 300 feet. Get up in the stope. First thing you do is grab a water hose and wet everything down. You want to get all the dust from the previous blast off the rock so you can see everything better. We have one of these long metal bars with a point on the end of it. That's called a scaling bar. And we use those to beat down and pry down any loose rock you can find. You don't want anything to vibrate down later in the day. Work your way all the way back to the end of your stope, what's called a face. That's where you put in the eye pins, and we have some of those sticking out of the rock right over here. They got loops on the back. Hang a block off your eye pin, pull the cable for the slusher back and hook that up. Now the slusher works as a drag bucket. You run the bucket back, scoop up the rock, drag that out to the ore chute where it'll fall down to track level. There's a big steel gate there. That's where the guys on the train crew load up the ore cars. They'll take that muck out to the main station for that level, and they'll have that shipped to the surface to be milled. In this area, all the mines keep their mills right on site, really close by. One of the reasons for that is when they're done mining that vein of ore out in both directions up in the stope, they come back out to the ore chute and they build a big wooden wall. It's called a sand wall, and they seal that with burlap. Now, on the surface, when they mill the ore out of the rock, the waste rock that's left is in the form of a real fine sand. They'll mix the sand with water and pump it back underground. This area they just mined out, they backfill that with sand and water. When the water runs off the sand sets up like concrete. That keeps the ribs, the sidewalls from caving in. It gives them a floor to walk on so they can do the next cut across. And it puts all the waste rock right back where they got it, so they don't have big piles of waste up on the surface. Now, to drill holes for ground support like what's above our heads here, or the holes for their explosives, they use one of these. Now that right there is a jackleg drill. That's a miner's drill. With that steel, the machine and leg, that weighs 120 pounds. I'm going to fire this up so you can see what they look and sound like running. These are a little loud. I'd like to do that for 8 hours a day. In an hour, in an area the size that I'm standing in right here, you probably have 2 or 3 of these working at the same time.
Wow.
That's why most mining companies today are going to dual hearing protection, earplugs and ear muffs. Anybody want to get a picture standing by the jackleg?
Yes, you.
In the middle you have what's called a burr. To the sides are rib holes, top back holes, you got knee holes and lifters. You always leave it unloaded or reliever hole in the middle of a burn. Explosives will break rock, but they have to have somewhere to break it to. The blasting caps we have on display here have a built-in time delay. Bigger the number, longer the delay. Smaller the number, shorter the delay. This will let you pick and choose which hole is going to go off when. With this pattern, you start in the middle with the burn, bring the sides in, top down, you shoot the bottom of the burn last. This drills the rock out of the burn and gives you a bigger hole to start collapsing everything else into. Again, bring the sides in, top down, shoot the lifter holes at the very end. That throws some of the rock back away from the face and makes it a little easier to clean it up. I've got an electric light display right here to help me explain this. You guys want to stay down on this side, you'll see better because it's going to be right here. Excuse me. Start in the middle, work your way out and around, sides in, top down, shoot the bottom holes last. This is a lot slower than the actual explosives underground to go off like. Underground, everything is timed by milliseconds. It's like a string of firecrackers, just boom, 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 it's done. If that was an actual drift round going off, when that was all finished, that hole would be 12 feet deeper. Up in the stopes, it's a little different. When you backfill with sand, you try to leave a foot of room in between the sand and the rock to give yourself somewhere to break the rock to, so you don't need to drill out that center burn. Starting at the bottom of the rock, if you looked up 1.5 feet, you'd see a row of holes across, another 1.5 feet up, another row of holes all the way at the top. And when you time that to blast it, you time it so starting with the bottom row of holes, You break the center down, then bring the sides in. Next row up, break the center down, then bring the sides in. Work your way up to the top that way. Another thing different up the stopes is the amount of advancement you're going to try and get. That'll depend on what kind of rock you're in. If it's solid rock, if it's all fractured up, how much ground pressure the rock is actually under. If you're in decent rock up your stope and you want an 8 foot of advancement, you drill all the holes out to 8 foot deep except for the top 2 holes in the center. Those you drill out to 10 foot deep. Then when you're loading explosive charges, those 2 10 foot holes, you stop the charges 8 foot in so everything is loaded equally. When you blast that round and come in for your next shift, you should have 2 holes there pre-drilled 2 foot deep. Just to give you a place to put in the eye pins, to hang your block and run your slusher cable. And if you don't pre-drill those holes, you get to grab that jack leg and hoses, crawl on top of that mud pile and drill yourself a couple holes.
Wow.
It is so much simpler and easier to pre-drill them when you're already set up and drilling. Work a little smarter, not a little harder. And if you have cross shifts, guys that work that area on a shift after yours, and you don't leave them pinholes, they will come talk to you. That's more work than they ought to have to be doing. All right, we're going to go on down this way. If you look up in here, this is what it looks like in a stope after they set the explosives off, when you got rock down on the ground. As you're building the raise, the ore chute will be right in front of where you have this slusher sitting. What you want to do is get the rock from back there out here to the ore chute, and this is how they do it. That beats a shovel. Now after you get muck cleared out of there, you go in, you finish barring down, you do all your own ground support, then drill, load, and blast those holes by the end of that shift. This is a really simple machine, but it'll save you a lot of work. This right here is an old air-powered tugger, air-powered winch. You find these at the bottom of the raises. It's how they get supplied up to the scope to you. The new ones are a lot smaller than this and a lot more powerful. This was actually set up with a supply bucket over here at the old shaft. Come over here, you can see the shaft. You look down in there, that goes 200 feet down, 800 feet out each way to the bottom. And over the years, it's filled up with groundwater. Want to go swimming? I'll get that in a second. Now, if you look right here on the rib, you can see the white quartz veins that they were following when they come in. Nice looking quartz veins, but they never found enough actual silver in the upper part of the mine to make money with. All the good stuff went from 2,000 feet down and below, a mile and a half up the canyon to Day Mines. That's where their hoisting mill was. If you look right where my light's shining, do you see black in the rock right there? That black is raw silver. That's what silver looks like in the rock form. That's why they sank the shaft here. They was hoping that'd get better if they went deeper. It did, but these guys didn't go deep enough to find the good stuff. This right here is underground communications between the miners underground, the hoistmen on the surface. He's got a matching one up in the hoist room. Anything you do with this, he'll see it here in the hoist room. Whatever he does with his, you'll see it here on the different stations underground in the mine. It's like Morse code for dummies, and it works really good. 1 to stop, 2 down, 3 up, 2 and 2 release, 9 bells for danger, and the 4242 hurt man flash. Those signals are standard in the mining industry. You'll find those in shaft mines clear across the country. All the station signals change with each different mine you go into. That's why these are posted on every station underground in the mine, so everyone knows the correct signals for that mine. It's a good system and they still use it. You boys each want to try it one time?
Yeah. Do it twice. Just pull up.
When you're ready to run this, you get up on the stair and turn it on. Run it forward, scoop up the muck, pick the bucket up, bring it back, flip the bucket over, and throw it in the ore car. These will actually pivot to either side so you can clean up both sides of the rail. The ore car we have sitting right here is a 1-ton ore car. It's actually too small for this piece of machinery. For this you need a 5-ton ore car. I'm going to fire this up to show you how they work. These are kind of loud.
Wow.
That really beats a shovel. As you notice, when you're running this piece of equipment, you're standing kind of close to the moving parts. You do need to pay attention to these. But if you watch what you're doing, this is a great piece of equipment. You can move a lot of rock real fast with it. Now, all three pieces of equipment I've shown you in here today, all three of these are still used underground in mines. They do still use these. Anybody want to get a quick picture standing on that one? Right through here you can see some more of the white quartz they were following when they come in here. Here where I'm standing, you can actually see a difference in the way this rock's been mined. Everything from right here back's a little higher and wider. Right here out, it's lower, narrower. This is where in 1960 they started using power equipment. Everything from right here back's been mined by power equipment. From right here out, it was all dug by hand. And those guys never found anything at all. That's a lot of dedication.
That it's low.
The first time I went through it, I was scared to death when he turned the lights out. I couldn't believe that they operated with candles.
What? What?
Gotcha.
Lauren, you enjoy that?
Alrighty,
It's real.
now I can relax. So my favorite rags to riches story, having to do with mining, is a story about May and Al Hutton. They had about 6 partners in a mine that they called the Hercules Mine. May was a camp cook, and Al was an engineer on the railroad. They worked that mine for 12 years and never got anything out of it. And then one day, one of the partners noticed something that looked like fireplace ash. And so he scoops them up, took it down to the assayer's office, and they said, "Congratulations, you're rich." That is wire silver, the purest form of silver there is. All the partners walked away with what would be $50 million today.
They built the Hudson settlement. They built Comstock Park.
So Alan May did a lot for the community of Wallace. But they also opened up a home for children in Spokane.
Still there?
And they retired to Spokane, where they were instrumental in building up downtown Spokane. When May died, Al became a Shriner. And his influence was part of what made the Shriners Children's Hospital, which is still operating today. Straight ahead of us is the Melodrama Theater. It's the oldest wood building left in Wallace, and it still operates as an interactive theater 2 months out of the summer, and it's a lot of fun. It started out as a wallpaper store. But they didn't sell wallpaper upstairs. And that kind of brings us to the fact that Wallace was a rough town. At one point, we had 13 bordellos operating. The oldest one was called the Oasis Bordello, and it was operating in 1988 was when it closed its doors. Wallace made it into a museum. And you can go through the bordello and see how the girls live to this day. It's right over here to your left. One thing that most people don't know is that the girls were responsible for buying band uniforms for the high school band class and several police cars. As we come around this corner, at the next intersection, there's a stoplight. Kind of a normal-looking stoplight. But when Bank Road was the original I-90, that was the last stoplight between here and Boston.
Wow.
So every year, Wallace gets together and they have a little ceremony and they kind of bury the stoplight. This building over here is the courthouse, and Clarence Darrow argued a case there. It's also made with mine tailings, which means that there's gold and silver in the walls. Perfect. So at the same time that we bury the stoplight, we also rededicate this next intersection as the center of the universe. If you look over the left side here, you can see the manhole cover that says so. We claim national television fame for that. Okay. You're really good at that. So we had 3 movies made in Wallace. The first one was a silent film that was made before my time, a little bit. The second one was a film that starred Chris Christopherson, and it wasn't very popular. But the third one was called Dante's Peak, and it was a little more popular. It starred Linda Hamilton and Pierce Brosnan. And we got a little bit famous with that one. So we're going to head down to the residential area. I want to remind you that all of the buildings in Wallace were built between 1890 and 1920. All of the buildings and all of the homes are on the National Historic Register. This is the Methodist Church to your right, and it's significant because of its windows. Those are the original windows, and they're over 100 years old. In the 1920 census, there were more millionaires per capita in Wallace than any other city in the country. Now remember when I told you about May and Al? Their little house is the second house from the corner over here on the right. It's the little blue house. She was reported, it was rumored that she had Teddy Roosevelt come to tea there. But I kind of doubt that because she was a Democrat. And a very active Democrat at that. She wrote a book about politics once, but that's a total other story. May was quite a character. So Teddy Roosevelt did come to visit, and he's the only sitting president that did. So Wallace got kind of excited about that, went out and spent $5,000 in flags, only to have it rain the day of his parade. One of those flags is on display up at the museum. The Depot Museum, so you might want to stop by and see it. Most of the homes in Wallace, or a lot of these big old homes, are generational homes that are kind of passed down from family member to family member. Over on your left, at this corner, is the Magnuson Home. It caught fire last summer, and they've had a hard time replacing all the pieces that need to be genuine. On this left-hand corner, again, is the old Episcopal Church. That's one of the oldest churches in the valley, and it's now a photographic history of Wallace and the Silver Valley, and it's really worth going to see. So when I said that I-90 was going to come through and destroy the train station, that wasn't all it was going to destroy. It would have gone straight through Brooks Hotel and wiped out the entire city. And that's why we're on the historic register. We're the only city in the country to have that designation in our entirety. So we're headed up here for the old I-90 that I told you about before. But before it was I-90, it was called the Yellowstone Trail. And it was the first transcontinental road that was built specifically for automobiles. We're going to go past the center of the universe again up here. I'm going to try and cut in so that you folks on the left or the right side can get a look at it. There it is. We've actually had weddings there, believe it or not. Usually though it's just photographs. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the tour this afternoon. I hope you stick around and go to some of our other shops. I really hope you stop and get some ice cream in our ice cream parlor. It's the best in town. We've enjoyed having you. Hope to see you again. And you have a safe ride home. Okay, there you go. Now we're going to wake somebody up here. Stephen